To lose a baby at any point in a pregnancy can have an enormous physical, emotional toll. But with 1 in 5 miscarriages happening before 24 weeks, most parents won't be eligible for paid bereavement leave.
Yes, a new report from the Women and Equalities Committee wants to change that, calling for a law which would ensure bereavement leave is available to all women and partners who experience a pregnancy loss before 24 weeks. So we're joined by the broadcaster and campaigner Myleene Klass and the MP Sarah Owen. Now, they're both campaigning for this change because they have both experienced the heartbreak of miscarriage. Thank you both for coming in to share these experiences. As I said earlier, we've already been contacted by women who know this trauma. Myleene, in your case, you were entitled to leave, but it was sick leave. But the thing is, you're not ill, are you? You're grieving the loss
I think this is where the complication comes, because you know that you need the time off.
Yeah.
I actually, at the time, couldn't take the time off, but it feels that you have to take the option, whereas with bereavement leave, the parameters or the boundaries for both the employee and the employer are very clear. Right. This is not the first time that this has been mooted, which is, I guess, frustrating. But again, at the same time, it shows the importance that people do feel we need this change. It's integral to looking after both the women and the family's mental health. How can you dismiss the loss of a child as in the same bracket or the same arena as someone having a common cold and just needing to go and see a GP? There has been a baby lost, and that should be acknowledged.
Sarah Owen, you also have suffered the trauma of a miscarriage. In your case, did you also have to argue for sick leave? Did you take time off under the guise of this is an illness when it's not? It's a loss, grievous loss.
Absolutely. So I've had 3 miscarriages, and the first 2 were when I was working for an employer, and yeah, they were really supportive, but it had to be sick leave. And for me, it kind of reinforced the idea that there was something wrong with myself, something that I had done something wrong. It was my fault that I'd miscarried, and actually, that's not true.
Why did you feel that? What makes you feel like that?
Because you're not acknowledged that it was a loss.
Right.
It's seen as a sickness, and as Myleene has said, it's not a sickness. You need time to grieve, and you need to feel supported, and you, especially as a woman, need to feel that this wasn't your fault, because there's enough going on at that time. And also sick leave, for many women that we'd heard in the inquiry, they were really worried it was going to build up for HR purposes, that it was going to kick in HR warnings. And so sick leave really isn't appropriate for this.
If you were getting the sick leave, how would that work? Would you have to go to the GP and get the GP to sign a letter? Because I think one thing people will be thinking is, how do we manage this if we're doing a bereavement leave for a miscarriage in the early weeks? Presumably it's the same with sick leave.
I did have to get a GP's letter, and also constantly reporting to say, I'm still ill, or I need this time off. And actually with bereavement leave, just having up to 2 weeks where you're just left alone to deal with your grief, I think is so important.
But would you still have to get the GP to confirm to the employer that there had been a miscarriage?
I think that would be up to each individual employer. I would say that I would like to think that they would do this based on trust. We don't have to prove when we've lost a loved one. We don't have to prove that we've lost a grandparent or a mother or a father. It's just taken as read. Right. And ultimately, if we're talking about grief of a loved one and grief of a pregnancy and a loss of that, then we should just take that as read, I believe.
So in law, there wouldn't be... The employer would, if they were told, they would just accept that?
So we are asking, as the Women and Equalities Select Committee, to amend the upcoming Employment Rights Bill to say that we treat this as the same as every other kind of bereavement.
Right,
yeah.
right. OK, that's interesting.
Myleene, you've been honoured, of course, for your work in just raising awareness of this. You've suffered multiple miscarriages. Do you think that there is enough sort of investigation into why this happens?
There's no investigation and there's no data collection, and this has been something that I've been campaigning for in the past 4 or 5 years now. Initially through the Women's Health Strategy, which was ignored. This part of data collection was completely ignored by the government, the former government. Then with the Pregnancy Loss Review, it was mooted. But again, data collection, we don't have a clue as to how many women this is happening to. We think it's 20,000 per month. We don't know why it's happening. We don't know, you know, for example, if you go and see your doctor, the first thing they'll say is, does high blood pressure run in the family or heart attacks? We don't have any idea whether fertility issues or miscarriage runs in families, because we have been taught for so long as women to keep silent. It's a deep, dark secret. Even the first trimester, we keep silent in our pregnancy.
In case
Just in
you
case,
lose the baby.
But in case of what? Because then what happens is you then need to go to your doctor, or you then need to go to your employer and say, I was pregnant and now I've lost the baby. And it's a double whammy. And this secrecy is something that is an actual effective prison for women.
I find that remarkable that we don't have any sort of large-scale data collection because of
small scale. We don't have any data collection.
But presumably individual doctors know.
If you tell them.
Yes.
But if you miscarry in the food hall, if you miscarry at work or on the school run, then the GP, unless you ring them up and give them this information, it doesn't go on your data. And a lot of people who say, well, what about data protection? Well, if I could buy a phone, you know more information about my buying habits, my living habits, my family in those first few minutes than you know about my actual history, which could then help my children.
Yeah. And I think the trouble is, I can sort of sense that it's down to the woman to feel like she has to protect the pregnancy, she has to do everything right. And if she miscarries, as you said earlier, Sarah, it's almost as if the woman did something wrong, whereas if there was data collection and an investigation, you could find out.
God forbid we question male virility, but we have found that when it comes to male virility, if you're taking hot baths, if you're a lorry driver, if you're a cyclist, if you're drinking caffeine, alcohol, this also has an impact. So look, this doesn't want to become a blame game. It's difficult enough as it is. But when the woman takes a sole responsibility, and it might actually be something that's happening with her partner, this is where miscarriage care actually has to shift to the school, the classroom, education in what miscarriage and baby loss looks like and how to look after your fertility. That's where initially and it should start and where ultimately we'd like to end up.
And Sarah, I mean, there'll be viewers watching men and women running businesses who will say it's another burden, you know, national insurance is going up, minimum wage is going up, there's an employment rights bill. And the problem with this one is it's so hard for the employer to know what is happening. It's such a private thing. How do you reassure businesses that it won't end up with lots of people wanting to, you know, take extra leave?
So I'm really glad that you raised that point, because at the inquiry we heard from the NHS, the largest public sector employer of women in our country, and they introduced this just before summer and actually have said it costs them barely anything.
Right.
Barely anything. They're the largest public sector employer of women. We also heard from private sector employers as well that have said that it's increased their retention rate. And I also spoke to the British Beauty Council yesterday about this, because a large number of those are small employers, and it's a huge sector that employs women. And they said, actually, this written into law will give them some reassurance and some guidelines as to how to look after their staff well, because a lot of small businesses, particularly, they would want to do the best by their employees. And this is what's best for their employees.
So where are we at with this proposal? Is it likely to get into the new bill? Is it on the cards?
So I've written an amendment on behalf of the Select Committee as one of the recommendations that came out of this inquiry to the Employment Rights Bill. A large number of MPs have supported it already. If your MP hasn't, please encourage them to do so, and hopefully it will be selected for debate and for a vote when it comes up.
But the big question is the Treasury, Rachel Reeves, the Business Minister Jonathan Reynolds, is their bill. Will they support the amendment? If they don't, much harder for it to go through.
It is much harder, but also I think that the case has been made. As Myleene said...
They've not said they won't support it.
They've not said they won't support it.
Well, no, the former government last year, when I mooted this to them, said that it would cost them too much. And I said, ask them, what does too much look like? And they didn't have a figure because there was no data collected. We know at the moment it's in excess of 360 million because women don't know where to go. They're going to triage in A&E, they are going to their GPs, or they're going to nobody. If you have a consolidated a point that women can go to and get the correct treatment that they deserve, it will cost everyone far less.
Cabinet ministers ignore select committee chairs at their peril. Are they going to ignore you, or are they going to listen?
Well, I am fairly new into this role, so I'm hoping that they won't, because I think that public opinion is with us on this, and I think actually business is with us on this. They want to do what's right by their staff, and actually for retention purposes alone, this will pay dividends. And we know that people have left. We heard from one woman who said that her partner wasn't allowed time off, and she drove herself to hospital and she nearly bled to death on the way. So the importance about partner support is huge. And that man, he left that employee because he was just like, they don't support my values. They didn't support me and my family when they needed it the most.
If you have a graded model of care, a pathway that everyone can follow, that both the patient and the medical staff agree on, that will save money because you're not getting the wrong attention in the wrong places. So it consolidates that care.
The bottom line is it shouldn't really be about the money, should it? It should be about the care of the women who are suffering. So thank you both for coming in and sharing your experience.
Good luck in Parliament.
Yeah, thank you. If you're affected by that issue, you can find advice and support, itv.com/helplines.